What's up, ladies and gentlemen? It's a Tuesday evening. We're coming to you live here with another episode of Woo Fantasy right here, presented to you as always by Rotoballer.com. And let me get to right out of the gate. Win big in 2021 with Rotoballer.com's NFL Premium Pass. Are you ready to dominate your season-long in DFS leagues? Rotoballer's NFL Premium Pass includes rankings, projections, cheat sheets for all formats. Get exclusive DFS tools, lineup optimizers, premium Slack chats. Join in on the winning and take 50% off of any premium pass. That is right. Use promo code WooFantasy for an additional 10% off on any of those premium pass. Just visit rotoballer.com/radio, sign up today, and start rotoballing like a boss. Had to get that out of the way first, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, as it is here, we are brought to you by Rotoballer.com, as well as Underdog Fantasy and FanDuel. Both of those, we have you set and ready to go as well with promo codes Woo Fantasy and Woo, respectively, for those sites. So, wanted to come to you a little bit this evening, and like I mentioned, we put it out on the Twitter account at Woo_Fantasy. Most of you do follow that, and we do appreciate that. Wanted to kind of touch base with you guys. We've had week one fall by the wayside. We're through the first week of the season. Hopefully everyone is coming away with a victory. And if you took a loss in week one, hopefully we can kind of dig down deep and jump into those waiver wires and get things set up for week two and get on that winning train this week. So that's why I wanted to kind of come to you guys tonight, guys and gals out there. I'll go ahead and state that, but not joined by the co-host this evening, Nick Heffley, the real FF GOAT. He is at home enjoying a little bit of family time this evening. So I figured I'd kind of throw out something a little bit short and sweet and to the point. Kind of take your questions. I did put that out on the Twitter. So if you've not jumped in on Twitter yet, please do so now. Well, we would greatly appreciate it. I'm taking all your questions right now, whether it's waiver wire, you have trade questions in mind. I'm going to kind of get into a breakdown of my week two ranks, which I just put out just a few minutes ago. We're going to get to that as well. But I really want to kind of touch things off right off the top of the bat and go over the situations with some of the respective backfields that are a little bit confusing as we head into week two action here. First and foremost, and it'll probably be the ones that we see the most questions about as we get into week two action here, and that's San Francisco and that 49ers backfield. We saw, of course, Sunday morning, if you joined our show on Sunday morning before the kickoff, Raheem Mostert was the by large go-to running back pickup and start for the week for a lot of people out there. He was the guy that you were going to and starting in your DFS lineups, and he just absolutely disappointed. Comes out of the gate and gets injured early on in the ball game and is done for the year now. That news comes down earlier today. Raheem Mostert opts for surgery and is done for the rest of the year. So the question being, and a lot of people are wondering what the situation is that's going on in San Francisco right now. You had Elijah Mitchell, who come in and in relief in that ball game with Trey Sermon being inactive for that game, which was a really big question mark for a lot of fantasy managers out there, is why Trey Sermon was inactive in that ball game. And there's a lot of conjecture out there and a lot of skepticism, a lot of speculation that's being put out there right now. Kyle Shanahan says in a post-game press conference that it was just simple as Elijah Mitchell and JaMycal Hasty beat Trey Sermon out in training camp. I have doubts about that statement, just based primarily on the fact that no beat writers, nothing that you could follow for the past couple months coming out of San Francisco, coming out of the Bay Area, pointed to the fact of Trey Sermon being behind any of those running backs in the rotation on that depth chart. So I think primarily myself, I think this is more of a situation where Trey Sermon's inability to play special teams led into him being inactive. I think Kyle Shanahan and that coaching staff wanted a little bit more flexibility with their roster. So I think that was the reason for that inactivity. for Trey Sermon in the week 1 matchup. They wanted an extra roster spot for somebody on special teams that had that flexibility, and that's something that Jermichael Hasty does for sure, obviously. So that's something to kind of keep in mind moving forward. So obviously everyone wants to know, do I need to go get Elijah Mitchell? Do I need to go get Jermichael Hasty in my waivers if they run tonight on certain formats? I think if it's a situation where you have a droppable player and you need to go out and spend a lot of money in your fab budgets, or if you do first run waivers, you have the waiver order with a lot of your leagues. If you're still doing kind of that old traditional waiver wire setup, put in a eligibility for Jermichael or for Elijah Mitchell. Go grab Elijah Mitchell. We now know with Raheem Mostert done for the rest of the year that there's going to be a split in this backfield. We're going to see Trey Sermon factor in here. I think there's no bones about that. Trey Sermon is going to play, and with it being the Shanahan backfield that we've come to know and love, there's going to be a split in this backfield. So you're going to see Elijah Mitchell factor in. You're going to see Trey Sermon factor in. They're going to mix in a little bit of Hasty as well. So I think for me, you're going to go out and get Elijah Mitchell. You're going to spend that fab up. Percentage-wise, $100 budget on most of your fab budgets that are out there. If you haven't spent anything going into week 1, I would probably say anywhere in that neighborhood to 35-45% of your fab. Especially if you're hurting at the running back position already and you have question marks with your depth, you might want to jump it up a little bit higher. You go in a little bit further. Now, the major question comes to the Trey Sermon managers out there. What to do with Trey Sermon? What should we do with that situation? That is a big question mark. I think Trey Sermon's going to factor in. I think that talent, we saw it coming out of college. He was, a high-profile back coming out of college, looked good, and all your scouting, every bit of scouting that we used and profiled him coming out of college. And then the landing spot here in San Francisco with that Kyle Shanahan scheme, I think things work out a little bit better for a Trey Sermon back in that zone running attack. He's a little bit more prolific, I think, as opposed to an Elijah Mitchell. Elijah Mitchell, don't get me wrong, is a great back nonetheless. But for me, I think I'm going to probably stick more with Trey Sermon as the main back in this backfield, and we're probably going to get a little bit more. You're going to see probably with the Elijah Mitchell split, I think you're going to see him kind of get more to that 45% split in that backfield. So I think that's how that shakes out. So if you're a Trey Sermon manager and you're left with question marks after week 1, those you have those question marks and they're solid. Let me tell you that is for sure. You should have some question marks with that, but I think we're going to rest easy. We're not going to overreact. Now, that's the thing that typically most of us do in week 1, especially when we suffer losses and you're coming out of the gate 0-1. You do typically overreact at the status of your roster and how deep your team actually is. But you did all this research, you did all this preparation leading into your draft. Be confident in what you set up with your team. Be confident in what you have moving forward. I think that the Trey Sermon, Elijah Mitchell, it's going to be a split backfield. Kyle Shanahan does this every single year. He gets the most out of the backs that he puts onto the field. So that's going to be something to kind of keep in mind moving forward. I think both are going to be ample running backs for fantasy production, depending on what you have on your roster out in front of them. I think those guys are going to be flex plays moving forward, both of them, depending on matchups. I'd probably start Trey Sermon in certain matchups a little bit more than I would Elijah Mitchell. So I think week 2 is going to be a big indicator here. We're going to really kind of see what they have with either of these backs. And I'm going to be interested to see how this plays out and what they do in this backfield. So that's the first of the 2 backfield questions that we really have. Now, the second, of course, really kind of come into play and come to fruition last night in that game between the Ravens and the Las Vegas Raiders. Everyone was excited about Tyson Williams. what he was bringing to the table. Obviously, the injuries to J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards really pushed him into the spotlight. And then, of course, we had all the question marks during the week with the Le'Veon Bell signing, the Devonta Freeman signing, and then late in the week, you had the Latavius Murray signing, which I did put out on Twitter as that I felt that was the most worrisome of all the signings that the Ravens did put forward. And I think we saw that kind of come into play last night. Tyson Williams comes out of the gate, looks really good in the first quarter, scores on a long touchdown run. Yes, I know it was on the 4th and 1, and it was on that all-out blitz that the Raiders put forth, and everything just split like this Red Sea. Tyson Williams up the middle for the touchdown. He has the fumble at some point late in the first half, and there's a lot of conjecture out there right now that led to Tyson Williams his inactivity in the second half. I think that probably played a little bit of a factor in there as well, but I think this was more of a hot hand approach in that we saw that Harbaugh liked what he was getting a little bit more out of Latavius Murray, and he kept him in there a little bit more because couple in that fumble with the failures that we saw out of Tyson Williams in pass protection. That was a big issue last night. Tyson Williams, if you kind of really detailed and watched that game, there was some issues with pass protection. So that I think that was something that played a big part into it later on as well. And we saw that at the end of the ball game. We saw Tyson Williams' failure to block on the edge led to the player on the rush coming in that got to Lamar Jackson, forced the fumble that led to the Raiders pulling off that victory in the ball game. So this is going to be a sticky situation moving forward in the Baltimore backfield. I think you're looking at an obvious equal split going forward. So if you look at it last night, overall, you had 12 touches for Tyson Williams. You had 10 touches for Latavius Murray. 46.2% of the running back touches went to Tyson Williams, 38.5% went to Latavius Murray. It was a 51% to 31% snap share split. I think you're going to see that even out a little bit more over the course of the next few weeks. And it's going to be a headache, ladies and gentlemen. So if you've got Latavius Murray on your roster currently, or if he's out there in free agency and you're looking into the waivers tonight, jump in and go get Latavius Murray. Same situation with the San Francisco backfield. This is a backfield that likes to run the ball. It's not strictly a one running back system. They're going to use multiple backs, and I think all the backs in the system are going to have some type of fantasy production that you can rely on depending on your league. Now, the interesting note last night with Tyson Williams was the 4 targets out of the backfield. That is something we rarely ever see with Lamar Jackson throwing the ball out of the backfield to the running back. So if that's something that can maintain, if that is something that Tyson Williams really kind of holds on to and grasps as far as a pass reception back out of the backfield, and he sees a steady dose of 3 to 5 targets a week and gets 2 to 4 receptions, that only increases his values when you look at it from a half point PPR, full point PPR setup for running back. So I think that's an interesting thing there as well. I myself have Tyson Williams in numerous leagues, and that was before the season really got kind of underway. So, but if you look at it too, earlier in the day, the Ravens did release Trenton Cannon. So we're probably looking at Le'Veon Bell being an active member of this roster moving forward too. Now, will he take some of the opportunity share in terms of targets out of the backfield? Will he take over some touches out of the backfield and make this kind of a three-headed monster? We saw a little bit of it last night with Trenton Cannon kind of mixed in some too. I think that's to be expected moving forward. So it's a dangerous situation, but I think if you've got Tyson Williams, if you've got Latavius Murray, you're okay. Those guys are going to be bench depth that you have currently, and you're going to have the flexibility to leak those into your starting lineup based on matchups, or if you got guys that are going to have more difficult matchups moving forward, then you're going to want to put them in there and start them. So that's what we're looking at with those 2 respective backfields with San Francisco and Baltimore. But aside from that, I did just release my rankings, and I put them out on Twitter. So Obviously, if you follow me at Roto Superstore, I've got those linked up and ready to go now. But I wanted to kind of get into those and talk about those a little bit now. And right out of the gate, we're going to go over the quarterbacks here, and I do want to kind of get into those quarterback rankings and discuss them. But let's see. I do have some questions. We've already got some questions coming in, and I truly appreciate you guys when you do jump in and send the questions. Those are much appreciated. Canadian Yonks, one of the guys that is a longtime loyal member, he took a loss because of Tanyan. Luckily, I did not have Tanyan anywhere. We'll get to the tight end ranks. Similar situation with Mike Gesicki. I've got Mike Gesicki in one league, but I've actually pulled off the victory in week 1 with that league, with him pulling the absolute goose egg in week 1. How embarrassing and shameful was that? So getting into some of the questions here, we want to talk here. James Goff coming in wanting to know, should he be worried about Wentz, the O-line, and Pittman? And truth be told, I think we do need to worry about that a little bit when it comes to that situation in Indianapolis. We saw the Seattle Seahawks get to Wentz an awful lot in that game on Sunday, which was kind of concerning. But that's also something, too, that we know from past experiences with Carson Wentz, that he tends to sit back in that pocket. He looks a little nervous at times. He can be troublesome as a quarterback and make quick decisions and snap decisions that are really off-putting when it comes to fantasy football production. And I think that's what we saw a little bit in that game on Sunday. This now, as far as moving forward with Carson Wentz, I'm not feeling too great. You know, obviously, if you've got Wentz, you're looking at Wentz from a perspective of a QB2. But what this really does is it's going to hurt the consistency and the production from a Michael Pittman. I think what the Indianapolis Colts are going to do, what they're going to use to win ball games, is obviously with the running game with Jonathan Taylor. If that is moving at full swing, if that is working to absolute perfection, it only opens up things for Wentz in that passing attack. Now, obviously, this week you've got them at home against the Los Angeles Rams. That is a very difficult matchup. I'm not really too keen on starting really any of the pass catchers when it comes to the Colts this week in that matchup against the Rams. So for me, probably would be a little bit worried about them currently as we project into the next few weeks of the season there, James. So if you're hoping on a wishful star there for some production out of Pittman, I think you're going to find that consistency to be very, very troubling. Next question here, we've got Marcellus ESQ kind of talking what we led the show off with. He had Mostert. Should he go all in on Mitchell? He has Chris Carson and Chubb as his starters. This is a full point PPR. It's a 12-team league. All in, no, but you do want to put a hefty amount of your fab into a budget for Mitchell, because obviously somebody does have Trey Sermon in your league. So that goes without saying. You do want to go in hot and heavy on Mitchell with your waivers tonight, or even into Wednesday. If I don't know when your waivers do potentially run. You do need to go all in on Mitchell. You're going to need to roster that guy. You have to replace Mostert, because I'm going to take a guess that Mostert was your RB3. You will need to replace that depth somehow or another. So definitely jump in. Put as much as you can in that. I would probably say anywhere in that neighborhood of 65 to 70%. Because you are in more of a troublesome position than anyone else in your league that might be looking to acquire Mitchell as more of a block procedure or to just add depth for potential trade. So for me, you're going to need to make sure that you can ensure that you get Mitchell back in your lineup to replace. And then my buddy, D-Bro, why do people hate Jalen Hurts? And what am I drinking tonight? I'll tell you what, bro. I'm drinking a nice solid, what the locals here like to call agua. It's water. It's nice for the pipes, and it helps to keep things flowing. When you do these solo podcasts, bro, as you know, when you do a lot of your own videos and stuff like that, you got to kind of keep these windpipes rolling and nice and clean and crisp. Agua. That's what I'm talking about. I appreciate that, D-Bro, jumping in and sending me a question there. That's my guy. If you don't follow him, D-Bro _ fantasy football FFB. Great content over there at FTN. Good friend, awesome guy. Why do people hate Jalen Hurts? That is a good question, D-Bro, because obviously I'm not hating on Jalen Hurts. I was with you through the offseason. I think the misconceptions that we had with Hurts as a passer were a little bit ill-fated. What we really saw in that game this last week was he looked like kind of a young Russell Wilson on the field. His ability to use his legs to stretch plays out, go get first downs, keep plays in motion, and to kind of really see the field, it really is going to help him long term because, we do have Devonta Smith. You do have Jalen Reagor. Those two are great. You got Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz at tight end. He's got some weapons to utilize. And what we did see from that running game over the course of the weekend, it was not the greatest. I think you're going to have to see Hurts really rely on his legs and his ability to extend plays, and that's just going to open things up for him moving forward. So back into, we got another question from Marcellus here as well. If you have both Tyson and Latavius, which one would you drop for Mitchell? Oh, man. That is a tough question for me, especially. I would probably, if I had to really pull the trigger and drop one of these two backs, I would drop Latavius. I think even though with the misgivings with Tyson and what we saw him and lose some playing time in that game last night, I think there's more upside. He has the more youthful legs. He's got more of that upside as a pass catcher. So you're going to need that when you're looking at that full point PPR. So for me, I would drop Latavius to bring in Elijah Mitchell there. And then that way you're at least kind of dipping into two different backfields to give you a little bit of flexibility, and you can kind of use that to your advantage when you're playing matchups and filling out your starting lineup each and every week. So that's one thing to look at there as well. So, and then last year we got Alabama football jumping in, and JT we trust. We do like ourselves some Jonathan Taylor. Did help lead me to a victory in my high stakes league this last week. So I of course am big time proponent of Jonathan Taylor as well there. So we'll get into these quarterback rankings here. I'll jump into some more questions as they kind of pop in and roll in. So definitely jump in if you've got the questions. If you have people that on Twitter, share this, retweet it, send it out there. Anybody that's needing help right now with their waivers, if you got trades that you're thinking about possibly pulling off right now too, send them in my way. We'll help you out there as well. I've got you covered here, but we'll jump into these rankings real quick. And I kind of just, as you see on the screen, kind of going through the top 10 there, Russell Wilson, right out of the gate, top quarterback on the board for me going into week 2. We saw he had a fantastic game here in week 1 when it came to what they did against the Indianapolis Colts. Russell Wilson was the QB7 on the week with the 4-touchdown game. Only 254 yards passing on the day and a limited upside when it came to rushing with just the 9 yards. But he gets the advantage of going back home, playing in a game against the Tennessee Titans, who absolutely were just torched for just Kyler Murray went all up and down the field on that secondary and that defense and on Sunday. Now they get to go and play week 2 against another high-powered team out west with Seattle Seahawks. I think Russell Wilson has every bit of the opportunity to be the QB1 this week. Looking at another 4-touchdown game potentially here. You're starting him, obviously. I think we're going to expect big things out of him. Kyler Murray at home against the Minnesota Vikings. Another game, I think that you're going to see Kyler really take advantage of a less than stellar defense. We saw kind of Minnesota struggle in week 1 a little bit with Joe Burrow and that Cincinnati Bengals offensive line that was much ballyhooed going into the season. But for some reason, they look pretty good against that Minnesota Vikings front seven. So I think Kyler Murray is going to definitely feast this week as well. I've got him at QB2. Mahomes, obviously, I think, and then at QB4, Aaron Rodgers. We saw that was a absolute crap show in week 1 against the Saints. I think he obviously rebounds this week, going back home to play the Detroit Lions secondary. Then rounding out the top 10 here, we got Tom Brady at 5, Herbert at 6. You've got Dak Prescott at 7, taking a little bit of a dip back, going out west to play the Chargers. We did lose Michael Gallup for 3 to 5 weeks, so he's going to have one less weapon to be worried about moving forward. Josh Allen at 8, Lamar Jackson at 9, and then Jalen Hurts at 10. And those bottom 3 to finish out the top 10, and I'll even go into the next 2 to finish out your top 12 as well. I've got Joe Burrow at 11 playing that horrible Chicago Bears secondary. We saw that play out on Sunday Night Football. Jameis Winston at 12, and then Matthew Stafford, who had a great game against that Chicago Bears secondary. I've got him at 13. So if you're looking at that bottom 5 from Josh Allen down to Stafford, I think this is going to be the area where I'm going to have a little bit more flexibility as the week goes along. There's really a lot of fluctuation that I could have with these players. I can anticipate seeing myself. We just mentioned and talked about Jalen Hurts. I think I could see myself moving him up a little bit. I think that's a matchup that he can really exploit against the San Francisco 49ers defense. Obviously, Burrow, I think there's a ton of upside for Burrow this week. I think you're going to see him be a heavy DFS play this week. Price is probably going to be very, very easily manageable. And we saw that Bears defense get threaded on Sunday Night Football, and I think you're going to see a lot of fantasy managers see that, and that's going to creep into their mind and what they want to use for their DFS lineups. And I think you're going to see a lot of people on Joe Burrow. So Burrow is going to be a guy that I probably will be moving up. All in all, I mean, we saw a really good high-scoring week for the quarterbacks. So I think that's going to be a situation where you can really look at picking up and playing. I think most of these guys, a lot of these guys were drafted as QB1s anyways. So you're obviously going to be starting them. You're not going to have question marks there. My guy here, Matthew, had Matt Ryan last week. Man, I'm sorry. But he's looking to pick up Winston this week. Smart move. That was Matt Ryan. If you saw my season-long ranks and what I projected for Matt Ryan for the season, headed in, I was not the biggest fan of Matt Ryan this year just because of all the narratives. If you plug those in with Julio Jones in the past, when Julio Jones was not on the field, that was a completely different offense. And so I think that's going to be something that's going to affect him from a consistency standpoint. What you saw from Winston, yes, that yardage was atrocious, 148 yards. The 5 touchdowns were great. That's going to be something that I think you're going to see him be able to – he's not going to probably have another 5-touchdown game. He might have one more in him this year possibly, but I think expecting a solid 2 to 3 each and every week from Winston is a solid game plan, a solid bet. So for me, I think Winston's a guy that's going to be kind of really filing in there as that low-end QB1 most weeks moving forward. So I'm good with plugging Winston in as your starter this week here in that game on the road against Carolina. So that's my quarterback ranks there. One guy that's not on there and was drafted as a starter in a lot of leagues, and we saw him struggle in week 1, Ryan Tannehill. I've got him all the way down at QB 17 currently. Going on the road to Seattle. We did mention that just a minute ago. We saw issue upon issue with that Titans offensive line being able to withhold the pass rush. And what was the issue we talked about with Carson Wentz just a few minutes ago? The inability to withstand that pass rush. And that was with one of the best offensive lines in football. And now you're going to have a team that struggles to stop an opposing team's pass rush going on the road to Seattle. It spells doom for Ryan Tannehill this week. And the biggest thing that we saw in week 1 with Tannehill and that Titans offense was that they really kind of got away from the play action pass. Last year, he led the league in play action pass percentage. I believe 36.9% was what they used in 2020. He was down to 11.7 that they called in that game on Sunday. And you would think with a running back in the backfield like Derrick Henry, that you would still be able to utilize that. Now, Arthur Smith moving down to Atlanta. You've got now the new offensive coordinator in tow with the Titans. That's probably going to cause a little bit of some inconsistencies. You're going to probably see a slow start from this team to begin the year. So that's going to be something to kind of keep in mind with the Titans moving forward. So if you've got Taney Hill as your starter, might want to go ahead and look into you want to have a backup plan moving forward with Ryan Tannehill as your potential starter. So then we're going to jump into the running backs here real quick and look at the top 10. I do have the top 20, I believe, listed on the page there. But it's all your usual suspects. I mean, semantics we can kind of get into. You can really play the top end of the board with Dalvin Cook, Christian McCaffrey. I've got Nick Chubb all the way up to RB3 this week. I think he's in store for a big, big game. We saw him with 2 touchdowns in week 1. I think you're looking at home against Houston Texans. I think you're looking at a big game from Nick Chubb in another 2-touchdown week. Probably looking at a big yardage game this week from Nick Chubb as well. So expect big things there. But outside of that, you got Kamara Jones, Derrick Henry as well. I think he's going to be a guy that I'm going to probably look to ever so slightly as the week progresses, bump down a little bit. Joe Mixon we saw with the big workload in week 1. Now is going to go on the road to play the Chicago Bears. I think we're going to expect to see a big week out of Joe Mixon again. Najee Harris, who oddly had a weird week when it comes to what he did on the field for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He played every single snap, 55 offensive snaps that he played in that week 1 game, but totaled 49 yards. That is an incredibly tough thing to do. And from an efficiency standpoint, that is not what you want to see. So all the concerns that we had coming into the season when it comes to when it comes to Najee Harris and that Pittsburgh Steelers offensive line and how they can affect his potential upside, I think you saw that could really kind of come into play in that week 1 game at Buffalo. So that's something to keep an eye on here moving forward, is how they can deal with some of the more above average defenses moving forward and how it's going to affect Najee Harris. They're going to have to utilize him more as a pass catcher out of the backfield. I think the running game is going to be a little bit of a slow start. We saw Ben Roethlisberger really struggle to throw the ball in that game the other day, too. Maybe as a little bit of the wind in Buffalo had something to do with it. We don't know. This is just early week 1 speculation. But that's something to kind of keep an eye on and look for moving forward. But at home against the Las Vegas Raiders, I think Najee Harris has a bounce-back week, jumps back in to the RB1 discussion this week. Austin Eckler at home against the Dallas Cowboys defense. Oddly enough, we saw Austin Eckler get a goal line carry last week, get into the end zone, but no targets out of the backfield. Was not even on the field during a passing down in that game. What the hell was that? I don't know, can't explain it. That is an odd circumstance. Maybe it had something to do with the game plan. Maybe it had something to do with keeping him off the field to kind of really take care of the injury that he had in the week. And when a lot of us were worried that he was going to actually be on the field for the game, I think that Austin Eckler kind of bounces back and we see a little bit more of a traditional Austin Eckler type performance this week. And then at 10, I got Chris Carson. I've got Ezekiel Elliott right now at 11, with David Montgomery finishing off your top 12, your RB1s for this week. If you notice there, I've got Antonio Gibson at 13, first running back off as the RB2. I think that game on Thursday night, we did hear early on Monday there was a little bit of issues. They were worried. He put in some practice time with the shoulder. We saw him kind of come off and holding the shoulder a little bit in the game the other day, but all indications are that he's going to be okay. But I'm right now, as things currently stand, I'm expecting that Thursday night game to be a really low-scoring affair, kind of just dragging your teeth NFC East defensive battle. So I'm not really expecting to see a lot of offensive fireworks there. And I think Antonio Gibson is probably going to be the only player that I'm going to feel is going to bring you outside of Terry McLaurin, and then Logan Thomas we'll get into as well. Really, those three, the Washington football team players, are probably the only three that I'm really feeling comfortable with starting in this matchup in week 2. And that, yes, that does mean Saquon Barkley, who I have all the way down at right now as RP27 for the week. Is that low? Sure. Is that probably warranted based on the matchup going into Washington on a short week with an offensive line that does not look good, that struggled mightily in week 1? I think that's probably going to be around where you see Saquon Barkley this week. He came out of week 1 unscathed. That's a plus. But I think what most of us, that it might be, myself as a Barkley manager in one of my high-stake league, got him as a second-round talent. That value was just too good to pass up at that point in time. So for me, I think that's going to be a situation where I'm probably going to sit him down based on other options that I have on my bench this week that have a little bit more upside with their matchups. So I think you're going to need to get through this first couple of weeks. Let Saquon Barkley kind of work back into form, because let's be honest, we really have not seen a truly 100% healthy Saquon Barkley since really 2019, his rookie season. He's been banged up. He missed all of last year. He was banged up a lot in 2019. And so that's going to be a situation to monitor moving forward. And that's something, if you've listened to this podcast, you watched us previously, we've talked about it. This New York Giants team is going to be an absolute dumpster fire moving forward. So that inadvertently affects, of course, Saquon Barkley's upside. So that's something to kind of monitor moving forward. And then if you've got him right now, you want to really kind of hold your head above water and maybe make it through these first 2 to 3 weeks, and then let some of the potential hits and misses kind of fall by the wayside until you kind of get into where you can start him and feel good about starting him. But outside of that, I mean, as you can see, I've got Jonathan Taylor, that tough matchup, as an RB2 right now. Deandre Swift, the running back we saw that had an amazing amount of targets in that Detroit Lions game. And there was a lot of us that, I especially was one of them that was worried about that report on Sunday morning that you were not going to see a true full workload from Deandre Swift. Yeah, I bit into it. I'll take the loss on that. I actually benched Deandre Swift in one league, but I started Tyson Williams in his place, so it kind of worked out pretty evenly. This isn't a more of a classic traditional scoring setup, so they really kind of scored around the same amount of points, all things considered. So it wasn't a bad benching on my part, but sure, things kind of hit a little bit hard there. But I think Deandre Swift, I'm encouraged by what we saw in that game there. He's definitely going to be a guy that you're going to want to play moving forward. That game this week on the road against Green Bay, I think, is a little bit more tough. That you'll want to use him in your half point, full point PPRs as an RB2 this week, just for the sure upside for what we saw in the targets in week 1. I mean, 11 targets. He accounted for 52.8% of the touches out of the backfield and had a 68% snap share in that backfield. That is an amazing amount for a guy that was considered to be iffy and not see that workload in week 1. So that's something I think you can kind of start him with full confidence moving forward. I think everything that we had worried about this last week, I think kind of we can push it off to the side and move forward. Matt jumping back in here wanting to know, honest question, how do you feel that James Robinson is a sell now candidate? No. I think that was a game script issue. They fell behind in Houston really early, and for some reason, I don't know why, Urban Meyer felt more confident with having Carlos Hyde on the field in that ball game. Let's look at it here. We had Carlos Hyde playing. He received 57.9% of the touches in week 1, but was only on the field for a 34% snap share. James Robinson was on the field for 64%, accounted for 42.1. James Robinson had 6 targets in that game to just 2 for Carlos Hyde. I think that was more of a situation where Urban Meyer probably felt more comfortable with Carlos Hyde on the field in pass blocking situations. They were obviously throwing, they were trailing, playing from behind. For me, I'm going to hold on to James Robinson until these next few games, because obviously right now you're selling him for pennies on the dollar. And you're even going to be selling him for pennies on the dollar as well this week. They're playing at home against Denver, and that stout defense as well. So don't expect another down game for James Robinson. So he's going to come out of the gate a little bit slow here. So for me, hold on to him just for the sheer fact you're not going to get the appropriate value. Obviously, as a fantasy manager, you want to sell when the value is the highest, and you're not going to get that with James Robinson right now. So for me, I'm going to hold and move on to the next one. But then, speaking of jumping into the next one, let's jump in and talk about these wide receivers real quick. Wide receiver rankings for week 1 or week 2 now. Devonta Adams back up top for all the reasons being it's Devonta Adams. Yes, it was a tough week 1. We touched on that just a second ago. Devonta Adams is going to bounce back. That game against Detroit, they lost Jeffrey Okudah to an injury. He's gone for the year. That Detroit secondary is going to be able to be had, and we've seen it before with Aaron Rodgers in Detroit. He has his way with that team. So no questions there. Number 2, at wide receiver 2 right now, I've got DK Metcalf. Similar situation. Tennessee secondary is atrocious. I think DK Metcalf and the Seattle Seahawks are going to be able to have their way with that team. Metcalf's in store for a big game there. And if you go all the way down to wide receiver 9, I've got Tyler Lockett inside the top 10 as well. So that really speaks to the fact of how my ranking reflects with Russell Wilson. I think this is going to be a big week for Russell Wilson in that Seattle passing attack. Tyreek Hill, DeAndre Hopkins, Keenan Allen at 5, Justin Jefferson at 6, Stephon Diggs at wide receiver 7, you might kind of think is a little bit low, but playing that Miami secondary, I think is going to be a little bit tough. He'll still get his, but I think we need to temper our expectations a little bit of Stephon Diggs this week in a road matchup against the Miami Dolphins defense. And then finishing out the top 12, we've got Cooper, the aforementioned Tyler Lockett, Calvin Ridley coming off kind of a disappointing week 1. Now he's playing Tampa Bay's stout defense on the road. He's probably a player that I'm going to kind of look to move down the list a little bit as the week moves along. This is just kind of an initial gut reaction to my rankings. But I think Ridley's going to be a guy that he's going to get those X amount of targets each and every week. The reception should be there. But I think we're going to see the scoring and the production really kind of fluctuate over the course of the next few weeks as this offense really kind of finds their rhythm with Arthur Smith now the head coach. It's going to be a little bit iffy. But then Cooper Kupp and A.J. Brown to finish out the top 12 here at wide receiver. If you kind of move a little bit further down from there, C.D. Lamb I do have mixed in here as well as a wide receiver 2. I think he's a great wide receiver 2 play this week. Then you're going to kind of get into, as you get into the next few picks and down into your top 24, you're going to see that I've got Chris Godwin at 14. I've got Mike Evans with a very, very unsettling, disappointing performance in week 1. He was on the field an amazing amount. Almost every single snap in that game against Dallas was rarely targeted as he was shadowed by Trayvon Diggs the entire night, which was weird to see that Mike Evans was not looked at. But I've got Evans at 20. I've got Antonio Brown at 22. So I've got all 3 Tampa Bay receivers in this matchup against Atlanta as startable wide receiver 2 and up type plays. I think you're going to be able to utilize any of them this week. I think you're going to see Mike Evans rebound, get into the end zone this week. And then outside of that, DJ Moore, got him down at 21, Deontay Johnson at 19, and then what we mentioned just a few minutes ago as well, Terry McLaurin, I've got him bumped down all the way to wide receiver 18. I'm just not feeling great about this Washington-New York Giants matchup as a potential matchup that you could target from a fantasy standpoint. So if you have players, and a lot of us, we're thinking it's the first game of the week, we've got one of our star-studded players, one of our guys that we drafted early on in drafts, and we're really geared up and amped to play these guys on these Thursday night matchups. But if the matchups aren't great, aren't good enough for you to exploit, there's no reason for you to play those players. So For me, yeah, I'm gonna be kind of down on Mclaren this week. I've got him in the league. I'm gonna plug him and play him because I think some of the players that get behind him are probably gonna score around the same as far as if from a total standpoint. So in that at that point, when you're kind of seeing an expected point production around a similar level, you're going to play the better player. But like I mentioned, you want to temper your expectations when it comes to Terry McLaurin and what he can possibly do this week. But then before we get into the tight ends real quick, I got another question popping in here. Joshua Weldman 6 wanting to know, how much fab are you putting down on Mark Ingram this week? I will be honest with you, Josh. Do not do it. I would not put any money on Mark Ingram. There are better players available on that waiver wire this week. We talked about it with the Elijah Mitchell. Go out and get him. Latavius Murray, if he's available in your league, if somebody dropped him prior to week 1, go out and get him. Kenny Gainwell, if you're in a 10-team league, he's possibly out there on the waiver wire. Go get Kenny Gainwell. Mark Ingram was a player that was really exploited based on the matchup and how the game script unfolded this last week. So you saw Mark Ingram get 26 touches in that game, played a 46% snap share, accounted for 63.4% of the touches, had one target out of the backfield. That was all based on the fact that they're playing with a large lead and they just grinded the clock out. So if we look at it from a truthful and objective standpoint, how often do we think that the Texans are really going to be out in front by that much, playing to that big of a lead, looking to grind the clock out? Not very much. So I think you're setting yourself up for failure to go and grab a guy like a Mark Ingram, who's really just going to be bench fodder on your team. You're probably going to be disappointed to the point to where you're going to drop him very soon off of your roster. So for me, I'm not putting down any money on Mark Ingram. And for me, I would hope that someone else in the league picks him up and attempts to play him this week. Because I think that's fool's gold, and what we saw from Mark Ingram this last week is not expected to really kind of hold and stay as we move forward. So getting into the tight end rankings, we'll jump into there real quick. We saw, of course, with week 1, we saw Travis Kelce, we saw Darren Waller both contribute big week 1 games. That's to be expected. TJ Hawkinson had a big week as well, also to be expected. But then outside of that is where you really start to kind of get into questions with this tight end position. So when you're looking at this position, you're really looking at guys that are going to bring you the highest upside in terms of potential with targets that are going to get those opportunities. And like I mentioned earlier on in this podcast, Logan Thomas is one of those guys for me. I think you're going to see him kind of get heavily relied on from Heineke in this matchup this week, especially as a red zone player. You might see Logan Thomas kind of get into the end zone this week. Catches and receptions probably aren't going to be that great, but getting into the end zone is king when it comes to tight end, and that really kind of pushes them up to the upper tier when it comes to these tight ends. Noah Fant, we saw Jerry Jeudy go down, going to be out for the next 6 to 8 weeks for the Broncos. I think Noah Fant is going to be a guy that you can really rely on now with that Denver Broncos offense. I've got him at tight end 6 against the Jacksonville Jaguars defense. I think they're going to really want to get Noah Fant involved in this game and really kind of lean on Noah Fant, and also kind of jump in and utilize Cortland Sutton a little bit more than they did in week 1, which then bleeds into another waiver wire question, especially if you're in a 12-team league, you've lost Jerry Jeudy, or you've got a little bit of issues at depth at wide receiver. Go grab KJ Hamler. You're going to want to get him on the field. I think they used him a little bit more on the outside and slot a little bit in this game this last week. KJ Hamler is going to be a guy that I think presents a lot of upside. But then kind of on a lower tier as well, Tim Patrick's a guy that I'm very, very interested in. So if it's a deep league and you've got a spot that you can kind of burn on the back end of your bench, I think Tim Patrick's the guy that you want to go get in your waivers tonight, tomorrow, what have you. Jump in there and go grab Tim Patrick, KJ Hamler in your waivers if you need the help at wide receiver. So doubling back, Noah Fant, I think he's definitely a guy that you're going to want to rely on. Mark Andrews, I've got all the way down to tight end 7. The matchups should be good against Kansas City. It should be kind of a back and forth affair. But I didn't like what we saw out of that passing attack for Baltimore last night. So it's really kind of a little bit of an issue for me. Mark Andrews is a guy that if he's not getting targeted in the red zone, if he's not getting looked at as a touchdown threat, he's really just not getting relied on too much. So I think there's some of these guys that I've got ranked above him heading into this week, I think are guys that are going to bring you a little bit more upside from a target and potential reception standpoint. Dallas Goedert, Jonnu Smith, Rob Gronkowski coming off the big game against the Cowboys, rounding out the top 10. Kyle Pitts down at 11, and then I've got Gerald Everett and then Bob Tonyan, the aforementioned Bob Tonyan we talked about at the top. I think Robert Tonyan kind of bounces back this week too. Are you comfortable if he's your tight end one based on your guy that you got behind him? I'm probably starting Tonyan this week. I think he has a little bit more of a bounce back this week. I think you're going to see that Packers passing attack kind of really regain its form in that matchup. So I'm okay if you need to start him this week. I think there's going to be the potential there. Kyle Pitts. What happened with Kyle Pitts in week one? That's a question that a lot of us are wondering about. You just didn't really see too much when it comes to what Kyle Pitts brought forward, and that was a little bit kind of concerning. And so can they get things going from an offensive standpoint? Can they really kind of get him involved? I think you're going to see teams really key in on Kyle Pitts because of the matchups, the mismatches he presents as a talent, as an offensive player. So for me, I'm kind of a little bit, I want to see Kyle Pitts do it. That's not going to be this week in that matchup against Tampa Bay. That matchup is tough. I might even drop him out of my top 12 by the time it's all said and done. I'm not comfortable starting him. Only places I've got out Kyle Pitts right now, actually, anyways, is in best ball format. So I don't really have that ability to start him or bench him or anything like that. I think Kyle Pitts is definitely going to be a kind of a wait and see how things unfold with this offense. And for me, say I'm in a position where I've got a Kyle Pitts or a Robert Tonyan. I think as we get closer to the end of the week, I'm going to have Robert Tonyan ahead of Kyle Pitts. I'd be more comfortable starting Robert Tonyan based on the matchup than I would with Kyle Pitts. Pitts is a better athlete overall. Yes, of course, obviously. But Tonyan, does he present more of an upside to get in the end zone and have a better day from a fantasy perspective? Yes, I think so. So that's what we're looking at there, and that's how we're looking at the tight ends there. Outside of that, it's just hodgepodge. What do you do with Juwan Johnson? 2-touchdown game this last week. He was the guy that I pointed out this last weekend, on the kickoff show. I told you to go get him. He's definitely going to be a guy that there's going to be a lot of people on the waiver wires after him. Another solid matchup this week on the road against Carolina. I think it's another positive game for Juwan Johnson. So if you're going to have the ability to go get a Juwan Johnson and plug him into your lineup this week, I would advise you to do so. Is he going to be a guy that's going to be on the field a ton and get a ton of looks? Probably not right now. But that threat is there to get into the end zone and have a productive day from a fantasy standpoint. And that's really, at the end of the day, that's all we want. But outside of that, that's what we're kind of looking at the tight ends. That's really kind of an overview. I know I had one wanted me to put out a kind of an overview of the defenses, and that's kind of what we're looking at right here. I pulled them up. If we want to look at the defensive real quick, kind of wrap this podcast up, this little special edition. I might kind of get into more of a rhythm of trying to do these Tuesday night shows after I get my rankings put out, answer these early questions, kind of help out with some of the waiver wire questions, things like that. Obviously, as we get further along in the season, a lot of you guys are going to have questions as far as potential trades and things like that. I have no issues helping you out there. That's what we're here for. I'm here to help you guys win as much as I'm here to help myself win. That's what it all boils down to. I'm not here to victory lap like we've seen all over Twitter the last few days. My gosh, let those guys, have at it. Those guys are excited about their one call that they've ever made in their career. That's great. Fantastic. Way to go, guys. Have your victory laps. But at the end of the day, I'm here to help you guys win. I'm here to help us all get these titles and bring home some of this cash. That's what it's all about at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. We're trying to get this money. at the end of the day. And me victory lapping is not letting you get this money right here. So that's what we're here to do. Then we're looking at the defenses real quick, kind of putting a bow on it. Also, if you have a question, if you want to know anything about my defenses and stuff like that, I'll put those out as well. But got them right here. Just kind of an overview, looking through the top 12. I've got Washington, New England, Denver, Tampa, Rams, Steelers, Packers, Browns, 49ers, Giants, Bills, Saints to round out your top 12 for the week. There's most of these are teams that are were drafted as startable tight ends. You know, some are not tight ends, but defenses. As you'll notice, if you kind of look through some of the rest of the rankings and stuff, some of your more well-known defenses, your Seattle Seahawks, your Miami Dolphins, your Baltimore Ravens, all those I've got as teams that I'm expecting a little bit less of this week. So those are teams that you probably might look to potentially bring in another defense to start and to play the matchup and stream at that position this week. So we've got a little bit more on the docket. We've got some data to utilize. We can look back on for week 1 and use that for our projections in week 2. And that's what we're going to do. And that's how you really kind of win when it comes to fantasy football. You really do want to kind of go forward, use the data that's brought to your attention from previous weeks, and help that kind of round into shape what you do as a fantasy football manager with your starting lineups weekly and even with your waiver wire pulls. You know, adding that depth to your roster. You want to make sound decisions as you fill out these rosters week in and week out, and that's what you're able to do now that you do have some true analytical data behind you. It's not conjectured, and we're not using stuff from last year, old data or anything like that. We've got fresh new data we can look at, and it helps to give us more sound decisions moving forward. So that's what we're looking at here. And then that's kind of wraps things up. We went right at an hour. I actually went a little bit longer than I wanted to. So that's what we typically do here with the Woo Fantasy Podcast is we get a little bit long-winded. I'm flying solo tonight. It's a new adventure for me. I rarely do the solo pods, but I wanted to kind of jump in here and help you guys out this evening. So hopefully I did accomplish that, and we can use this as we get into the next couple of days and start getting ready for week 2 fantasy football action. But as always, brought to you by Rotoballer.com. Definitely go check those out. Go get you that excellent premium pass, all that great content that myself and the rest of the amazing crew at Rotoballer bring to you each and every week. We've got some of the best. We've got really, I think, the best lineup optimizer out there when it comes to DFS. So jump in there, get you that premium pass, 50% off right now. Woo Fantasy promo code gets you another 60% off. How can you argue against that, ladies and gentlemen? Jump in there, get you some free money for the rest of this year, especially from a DFS standpoint. Speaking of DFS, Underdog Fantasy, promo code WOO, jump in there. They've got player props ready to go for you every week. Some of these excellent games. We're going to work on some things with them moving forward. We're probably going to do some listener, like 1 week leagues, things like that. Those are some things I'm kind of thinking about. It's just a matter of really kind of putting those into play and getting my pieces out and everything. And then also, of course, FanDuel. If you're in a state with FanDuel Sportsbook, definitely jump on there. Promo code Woo Fantasy there as well to give you a little bit of extra cash to play with. The Sportsbook is an amazing tool to jump in and play. You get these player props. You can bet on games each and every week. You can lose a lot of money quick, but you can win a lot of money quick. And that's what we try to do here with the podcast. And that is something we try to do each and every week with the Woo Fantasy Podcast. And until next time, I am the Roto Superstar, and we will speak to you.